Hey guys, it's Samuel Larsen here from growgurus.com. Now today we are going to look into product page optimization. And to begin with, you need to understand that the product page's purpose is to effectively communicate to the visitor all of the relevant information, but none of the irrelevant ones. So here we have two buckets of information that we need to be able to communicate. They are product related and then store related information. And here, if you think of the user journey, many of them do end up in the product page as the landing page. So if people are coming from ads, etc., they will end up on this page. So you need to take that into account and be able to match the ad experience with the product page experience. You can kind of think of the product page as your salesperson. You have your store as the store, your cart as the cashier. Now, the user or the visitor or the shopper will need to be convinced enough that when his cart is filled up and he's going to the cashier, he's not going to just abandon their cart and walk past the cashier without paying. So that's not going to be a scenario that we want. Now, for example, in the product page, it is one common myth that you'd want to optimize for a lot of add to carts. But here we want to keep in mind the end purpose, and the end purpose is to make sales. And of course, we can only make sales if they are convinced enough once they reach the cashier. So that's our responsibility, our duty as the product page optimizers. So let's give the visitors all the relevant information, such a great experience that they cannot help but buy, basically. So let's jump into the screen share, and I'm going to show you a few important principles on product page optimization. So here we are on the screen share, and we're going to take a look at a product page from Shield Republic. Now this is a store that sells apparel and different accessories. And for them, I'm going to focus in particular for the top of the fold section, or the fold above the fold section, because the rest of it is generally more custom, and it depends a lot more on the product. So for example, if you have something that is hundreds of dollars, you usually have a longer page. If you have something that is more of an impulse buy, there's not as much to explain, like in this kind of case, it's a t-shirt, then you'd typically have a shorter page, just because you don't need it and you don't need to overcomplicate a simple, straightforward purchase. So let's break this down here. Now, first of all, we have breadcrumbs. So people came from a certain place, and there's an easy way to go back to that certain place, especially for clothing stores, where people might be checking the different colors or different angles for the product. This can be particularly useful. And for stores that typically don't need breadcrumbs, there's very few of those. But if you, for example, have a single product store, you will not need breadcrumbs. And in some cases, some fashion stores have a very specific layout, or like they are very, very branded, so the breadcrumbs just don't fit into their placement. So in that kind of case, I've seen many drop them. But usually you will be dropping them at your own peril, so I wouldn't recommend that. Now, in terms of the rest of the page, you have a fairly standard slider here. Sometimes you see that on hover. On desktop, you'd also have the arrows, which generally helps in people going through the product images, because otherwise you'd have to click here to select them, and they might even be in different dimensions, which is actually a typical mistake, and this is not the perfect example from that perspective. But then you'd be able to easily go through the product pictures. So just click here, and you'd be scrolling it through. Now, one thing that they did was the ready to ship, and this is quite a unique thing. It might work, it might not. So I'd say this is something to test. But generally, there's probably reasoning behind this particular suggestion. So let's move on this product page. You have the title, you have the price, you have the reviews. So this is very, very standard. It's almost a cliche in e-commerce. You have the title, price, and the reviews. One thing with the reviews is that you could indicate here that they are also clickable, and you can get to the reviews by clicking them. That typically helps, especially if you have a lot of reviews. So you want people to be able to see the social proof easily and to connect that you can actually start reading those. When it comes to the color, this is a good implementation. You actually change color as you click on the variant images, so you don't forget to change it later on. And of course, like as you click here as well, you get a different product image. So this is something to check that this is the functionality on your store. Some stores separate these into two products. So they have this as a link between the product pages, which is also fine. But typically I prefer this because it's just easier to do it like this. And if you do that two different products approach that I just talked about, you are generally trying to get away with having a dysfunctional collection page. So if you have a collection page and you can show the product variations, the colors there, then typically you don't need the second product picture to be also on the collection page. Then on this desktop version, you have your size chart. So this is a pretty ideal implementation from the pop-up perspective, but it is providing me a lot of functionalities or like size charts that I don't need, which makes it quite difficult to read, especially on desktop devices if you don't have a huge screen. On mobile, it generally is actually easier because you can also pinch it. Here it's like the zooming is more difficult. So something to look out for. And why would you want to confuse them with all these different options? It's just like a bit more laziness from the merchant's perspective. Now you have your pretty standard choices here. And here you have an additional product upsell. This one is not particularly well done because you can't really make an easy sense of it. Like, what is it? Like, you'd have to click on the product page, and then once you try, you can't do that. So you basically have to search for it, like then figure out what it is, go back and do that. So make sure that your upsells are aligned in a way where it is a decision that can be made without researching the decision. So you can just tick this box here and make that decision easily. So that's something to look out for, and a very, very common mistake as well. One thing that the people don't take into account with their upsells is that the conversion rate can go down with those upsells. So it's not like you only have an upside here by adding this. These kinds of things, hassle-free returns and exchanges, these should always be a pop-up. Just like the size chart here, you'd have this open within a pop-up. So you can read through the policy here. And generally there's nothing wrong with having that on the page, but this implementation is then going to take them to a different place oftentimes, because once you read this, a typical person will just forget what they were doing before that, and then you have one completely lost individual back here, and a lost individual often reverts to their autopilot behaviors, goes to social media, wherever like the next stimulation comes. So often you'd want to avoid that at all costs. So that's why the pop-ups are superior to individual pages, especially in these kinds of situations. So that's the top of the fold. Notice that they do leave the descriptions further down the page, and this is not typically like a very well-coded page here because the styles change, etc. But this information is available here a bit further down. So you have the description, shipping, size chart again, and FAQs. So all the decision-making material, what's needed to purchase is there. And this is also a pretty typical implementation. You have the product badges. You have the product badges there to explain away the value proposition. Now, that's the desktop version. And let's look at the mobile one. One thing that stands out here before anything else is that like there's actually an extra field. So on desktop, they just hit that by accident. And of course, that like can be quite a big thing here if you really like the style, and you can't find the hoodie option for that particular style then. And now, with this one, you usually see the image sliders underneath the picture. But as long as the image can be big enough, there shouldn't be a big issue. In this kind of case, I think it works well because the image is kind of like a longer one. It's longer than it is wide. So in this instance, this functionality is actually well customized to the store. For most stores, they would have this information below the product image. So it is a little bit of a unique implementation. So you can just play around with it to see how it looks and feels for you. Here's an example of how it is typically done. So you just have product image, you have the vendor, you have the product name, reviews, and then the price. So there's a couple of different options here, but generally this probably won't make a big difference. What is a bigger thing here is how they are showing their styles, colors, and sizing. So for example, the colors, it's easiest for a human brain to understand it from this perspective. when you have actual colors to look at as opposed to the drop-downs. So moving further down on this page, you have your description. Generally, this is recommended to be open, especially on mobile. So you guide the visitor to understand that this is actually a tab and they can read the other ones as well. There's very little downside of having this open. So those are some of the things here for this particular page. I have a few more additional pointers here. It's good that they have, for example, removed the social media sharing buttons. This is not a place for that. Very few people will share a product before they purchase it, just because, like, why would they? There's a rare behavior for that. And of course, if they want to share it, they can share the URL or just click on their share button on their phone. So that functionality is already available for them. This store uses nice high quality product images, so they are zoomable on mobile, which is very important for apparel and also like any kind of other stores where you would have an image that explains the product. So there, like, the product will show up on a better light once you have different high quality images, and you also have images of product in use. You can get an idea of the size of the image of the product in cases where you have a little bit of question mark around that. In this kind of case, it's of course obvious what the sizing is. A couple of other quick things, especially for the desktop version, they could have a zooming functionality. So you can actually zoom in and see, like, how does this area look, for example. And maybe you can also get a better picture of this different design. Also, like, for stores that have the budget, creating a product video would be often a useful idea. You can talk about the background of the product and also provide a little bit more trust, showing that there are actual people behind the store and the product is high quality, etc. So those are some of the tips for product pages. You can cross-reference this with yours and see how sort of like compliant you are with these practices and take it from there. If you did like the video, please hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm, as I'm sure anyone using YouTube knows. And subscribe to the channel if you like these kinds of breakdowns. We have a homepage breakdown and the category page breakdowns coming up as well, so you're going to enjoy those ones. That's all for now. Cheers for watching.